alive. All alive. Let's just see if anyone shows up. That's all. Soy el vagabundo, vagando en el mundo, perdido en el sueño, buscando la verdad. No importa la respuesta, no hay pregunta, nunca sabremos qué hacemos aquí. Soy el vagabundo vagando en el mundo, perdido en el sueño, buscando la verdad. No importa la respuesta, no hay pregunta, nunca sabremos qué hacemos aquí. Del polvo vengo, al polvo vuelvo. No dejo huellas. I'm a stranger in a strange land. My fate is in God's hands. I'm fusing my heart with heart of the sun, the heart of the sun. Never mind the answer, there is no question. We'll never know what we're doing here, what we're doing here. From dust I was made, to dust I return. I leave no trace. El polvo vengo, al polvo vuelvo. No dejo huella. Right, so this is two viewers. That's you, too. Which makes me feel like I have to say something or do something. Maybe I will, or maybe I won't. I suppose it would be rude not to speak at all. Just can't even make eye contact. But the reason that I'm doing this at all is to find out if anything has changed after the retreat in Finland. And because there were things that I thought I might want to articulate after that experience. So I wanted to find out if I could articulate them, if they would come up and out. So I'm going to wait and see if they do. I was going to do it downstairs in a different room and a different setup, but it was too complicated. So I just stayed in this spot. Just done an interview with Chris Snipes for 2.5 2.5 hours long, talking about seen and not seen and other stuff. So of course I might be talked out. That's also possible. I'm also on Mixler, so that would be weird. There's one listener on Mixler. Hello, Brian. I'm also on YouTube. I'm doing something, I know I always say I'm doing an experiment, but this is more of an experiment than usual. Because I really don't know if I want to say anything. I really just want to see if just being online causes something to come up. It's kind of embarrassing if it doesn't, but that is inevitable nature of such an experiment, to risk embarrassment. I'm emptying my mind now. Emptying my mind, put my awareness in the body. Question is what do I want? What do we want? What do any of us want? Seems like an important question, because we wouldn't act in this world if we didn't want something. Possibly. It might be possible to act without wanting, but it seems as though it's fair to say that almost always when we're acting in any given way, it's because we want something. That doesn't follow from that our actions are geared towards getting what we want, because we may well be acting unconsciously. So what do I want by doing this experiment, by conducting this experiment? I want to find out if it helps me to tune in to a signal or a wavelength that I feel that I would like to be more in tune with. And that raises the question of why I think that would be the case. I could go for a walk in nature. If I went for a walk in nature, I'd probably be just in my head and thinking thoughts, and in a certain sense, certainly my thinking changes when I do this. There is something about the pressure that's created by the awareness of the other, and by that I mean my awareness of the other. Theory of mind. I'm now aware that 2 people on Mixler and 3 people on YouTube are probably aware of me. It's gone down to 1 on Mixler. And that's creating some sort of pressure. And that pressure is causing me to become aware of things going on internally. Hello, Martin. Hello, Paul. You missed the start. But you didn't miss much except me saying that I didn't know what I was going to talk about today, or even if I wanted to talk about anything. Just thought, it's kind of like, imagine you turn on the TV, you don't know if you're going to watch anything, but you just turn it on, see what's on, maybe just kind of have something in the background, kind of like that in reverse. Hello, Ollie. I'm turning on the telescreen, so the world is looking at me. But I'm not necessarily going to pay attention to that world. I mean, I'm in two minds about whether I want to be doing anything with it. Somebody did just ask a question, but I'm not. John, oh yes, I am, sorry. Are you familiar with John Fowles' work? I am. In fact, I read his journals, and I wrote about them, not very at any length, but I was struck by how much affinity I felt with John Fowles when I was reading his journals. It was almost like reading my own sometimes. And I've read the Magus 3 times, at least, and the Collector twice, and a couple of others. Those are the two that stand out. So I suppose I'll talk about something as long as I'm here. I'll talk about something that I call the recoil. The recoil is something that's probably observable in all organisms in nature. It's a mechanism within us that recoils from perceived or actual threats. It's an innate reaction, I guess, within the cells of the body, possibly. Hard to say exactly, hard to locate it exactly. Perhaps it wouldn't be if we had a laboratory and could put organisms under the microscope, but I don't. So all I know in myself is that it is a reaction within myself that is physical, but also non-physical, subtler than physical, emotional, psychological, energetic, which is that I will recoil from the gaze of the other or the presence of the other, which relates to what I was saying about doing this as a way to feel the pressure of the awareness of the other. Now, the way I first became aware of this mechanism within me was that I began to notice when I was walking on the street, and this would have been at least 10 years ago, possibly 20 years ago, when I became conscious of it, that when I would see someone approaching, even if from far away, when they first entered into my vision, I noticed that my body would very subtly veer away or jerk away from them, whatever direction they were in, my body would twitch away from them. So there was just a basic automatic fear response, a recoil to the presence of another, a stranger. And I've noticed that this recoil, even when it's not an actual physical recoil in my body, is there at a much subtler level in my awareness. That there is a way in which my awareness retracts or recoils or shrinks or contracts from the world. And this prevents me from actually being in the world fully. Like I'm always backing away from life. I think that's in Harold and Maude, isn't it? Backing away from life. Flinching from existence. Now, as with many things, and this is a side point that may be of interest to all 4 of my listeners. Shit, I forgot what I was going to say. What was my side point? Oh, the more I become aware of something, the less control it has over my actions, but the more acutely aware I am of it controlling them. So there's a constant paradox I've found in life in terms of becoming more conscious, which is that the more conscious I become of my neuroses, the more neurotic I feel, the more neurotic I'm aware of being, and yet by observation I can also see the less neurotic I am behaving. Therefore, the less neurotic I am. In other words, there's a correlation between becoming less neurotic and becoming more aware of being neurotic. So the feeling is of becoming more neurotic, while the reality is becoming less neurotic. So I noticed that in many different ways in my life. Anger, for example, the less angry a person I become, the more acutely aware I am of how angry I am and my micro rages, and vice versa. Because I'm able to observe things before they're possessing me. I'm able to observe them from the inside rather than from the outside once it's too late and it's already been acted out. So it's true with this recoil also, that the more aware I've become of it, the more subtle my awareness is of it, the deeper I go into recognizing this recoil within myself, because I'm not recoiling overtly to the same extent. So I'm going finer and deeper into the programming, the programmed flinch, reaction. And the flip side of this is the awareness that it is possible to meet life head on with all of one's body and being without the slightest trace of recoil, of flinching, of withdrawing, of fear or anxiety or self-consciousness. And that this is the optimal state that I'm seeking to experience. An experience of being fully engaged with existence, which is a very vague and abstract term, but to describe it in a more concrete way is very difficult. It's just like I don't have the language. It's a visceral sensation of meeting, of perception meeting that which is perceived without any reaction to it, without needing to create any buffer between my perception and that which I'm perceiving. So unfiltered experience of existence. I have seen the Clouseau film, The Wages of Fear. Pretty much sums up getting old. I'm not sure what William Boyce says he agrees with. But anyway, I don't think I was talking about getting old. So I feel as though this potentially could run into the other thing I thought I would talk about. As I said, I didn't want to come in with with a script or even a particular thing to talk about, but I was aware there were a couple of things I might talk about, and so they have stayed there, floating around. Hello, Scrouse. The back of my awareness. I'd like to ask, I don't usually or ever do this, the indulgence of my audience. Maybe I'm even asking for the support. It may seem that what I'm doing here is, well, A, it's what I've done many times before, which is true-ish, but B, it's not really that big a deal. I'm just sitting on the computer and talking. You know, people do that every day, and there are professionals, there are amateurs. You know, it's really nothing to it. One can do it badly, one can do it well. Okay, but when I say I'd like to ask indulgence or support, what I'm really hoping to achieve here isn't simply a matter of talking on camera. It's something else. And let's say that it's a reconnecting to the source of what I am, and allowing it to express itself through me. Now, it sounds a bit woo-woo and mystical. I'm not saying I want to sit here and channel, but if I were to give a bit more specific descriptions or ideation about what I mean, it would sound like that. It would sound more like that, not less, which is one of the reasons why it's difficult to articulate. Well, that has double meaning. It's difficult to articulate this particular point, but difficult to articulate period, which is what I'm saying I would like support and indulgence with. They're not the same thing. Indulgence means, I mean, patience and suspending of your belief or disbelief or your own theory of mind, helping me to neutralize my theory about your mind, as in not imposing expectations upon this, whatever this is that's happening, but rather clearing away those thoughts and expectations to create a larger space for the thing to happen, which I'm doing this in the hope that it will happen. Articulation of the beyond. What is beyond? What is beyond the mind, let's say, for starters? Beyond the social identity, beyond the script, beyond the agenda. Now, I've already mentioned the recoil, which somebody's agreed with that analysis. And this does pertain to the recoil because another way in which this mechanism I've described manifests or functions is not as a recoil, but as an assertion. What would be the opposite of a recoil? It's a pushing forward. I don't know if there's a word for that specifically, but say I'm walking down the street and I see someone coming and I flinch, and I don't like the fact I flinched, and I definitely don't want it to show. To show fear is to show weakness and to become vulnerable and to attract aggression, the very thing that I'm recoiling against the possibility of. So then I compensate for it and I push my shoulder forward as if I'm ready for aggro. I think this is what I do, what we do with our social altar, that it has these two settings. I said this about Jan Irving recently. He has only two settings. I didn't say which, but what I meant was defend and attack, which is why it's so tedious talking to Jan Irving these days, because that's all he'll do. He'll either attack or defend. And that's like fight or flight also. And although Jan doesn't fly, he's always in fight mode, whether it's attacking or defending. But in this case with the recoil, yeah, that's the defend mode is the recoil, and then there's the attack mode, which is this word, I don't know what it would be, but the opposite of a recoil, a pushing forward. And our social altar has these two settings, and often they function together, a bit like trying to drive a car with the foot on the accelerator and the brake at the same time. No wonder we wear ourselves out so much. We feel afraid and we feel anxious and we want to withdraw, but we also we react against that and we compensate for it by being over assertive and putting a side of ourselves forward that isn't an authentic expression of ourselves, but is a defended one. And so yeah, the recoil kind of, we recoil and then we bounce back from the recoil. Or if we're really on it, we preempt the recoil and we push forward in order to push through the recoil, so that we're not socially anxious, but instead we're socially oppressive, dominant, aggressive, assertive. We're not in that neutral space that allows for a response to come up spontaneously. And that's what I'm talking about. That's what I want. That's why I want to do this as an experiment, to see if I can find my way into that space live on your TV, where my body, and therefore my being, is relaxing into an interface with existence in such a way that it's not adding anything or putting anything between the act of perception and what is being perceived, which I suppose would also be the process of becoming aware and the act of articulating what I'm becoming aware of. That might also be a way in which that would manifest, like the body is speaking directly to the moment or to the environment, and thereby things within the body or within my being are connecting, like lines of communication are opening up and connections are being made, or forged, or re-established, because that's what we want. We want, in order to become who we are, we want for all the parts of ourselves to connect up, which itself, I think, can only come about in tandem with external connections to the world and to other human beings and to nature. But why am I saying all this? Why? It's not easy. If you imagine Neo and Thomas Anderson finding out that he was in the Matrix while still in the Matrix without Morpheus, and actually trying to figure out how to get to his true self. I actually thought that was going to happen in the movie. I thought that when Cypher was killing them all, that Thomas Anderson was going to wake himself up within the Matrix, and that was how he's going to become the one. Because you would think theoretically, once he'd been woken up once and he knew where the Nebuchadnezzar in his body was, once he was put back in the Matrix, he'd be able to find his way back without the technological interventions on the other side. I thought that was going to be the turning point in the movie. It wasn't. But yeah, if you were to imagine even before that, before Thomas Anderson had even really seen outside the Matrix, if he became fully cognizant in some way that his body was elsewhere, what could he possibly do to get back to it? That's what it feels like a lot of the time. And perhaps the more of a felt sense and a lived experience I have of my authentic nature, which is amped up to a very notable degree on the retreat in Finland, particularly this last one, but each time it's more, I think. I wish my face would stop recoiling. In a certain sense, that makes it harder every time to come back, end up back ensconced in this half-life of the constructed identity. Certainly you'd think it would make it easier to locate the true expression of the soul, etc., 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 but it definitely makes it harder to be isolated or alienated from it. Just as you can't miss the water till the well runs dry, or you can't miss what you never had. I think it's more the analogy I wanted to know. So it's only when we've fallen deeply in love with someone and then been separated with them that we know what loneliness is. Many people live their whole lives and never realize that they're lonely. I just listened to Bret Easton Ellis saying that he didn't get lonely, and I thought, he was saying even as a kid he didn't. I thought, I used to believe that. I used to believe I never got lonely because I enjoyed being alone and I found things to do. But my aloneness, it was a compensatory thing. Like I learned to enjoy being alone because the loneliness was so painful, the isolation. So we learn to live disconnected from our souls and even our bodies, and in order just to cope. And the more we re-establish connection with our souls, the harder it is then to be back in the disconnection. So we're getting corralled back into ourselves. Hello, Damien, proud owner of Matrix Warrior. This is the embarrassed author of Matrix Warrior. Anyway, so the thing I thought I might talk about, which did seem relevant to the recoil, was the experience I had on the retreat. It was that I thought it would be the first thing I'd testify to. A, because it didn't involve anyone else, and B, because it's just anomalous. So I'll see if I can tell a story, because I'm generally not much of a storyteller. I do have some notes which I could refer to remember. Lonely Planet. Right, so this was the morning, the second to last day of the retreat, which was Dave's Enlightenment Day. And it was the last full day of the retreat. And I ended up going to the toilet, outdoor toilet, thinking that I was probably about ready for a shit, and before whatever was going to happen would happen. And when I got into the toilet and sat down, I realized that it wasn't quite time yet for a shit. But the day before, Dave had been talking about taking one's time on the crapper. That it might be a good idea for some of us to just relax and let things take time and not always be in a hurry and not trying to make things happen. And this is something that I've explored myself over the recent months, is the possibility of taking a shit without using any effort, just allowing it to come out of its own accord without getting the muscles involved. Because when the time is right, that will happen. Now, that is all about timing. If one can get to the toilet within a few seconds, then it's possible to just sit down and let it all out. But if the timing's off, one has to hold it in even for a few seconds, then I guess the body adjusts, the ship says, okay, we're gonna go on hold now, close the gates, and then one may have to wait quite a long time after that. So on this occasion, I decided I would wait, even though I knew there would be things going on in the retreat, things maybe that I would want to participate in. I decided I would sit and wait, thinking it would just be a few minutes. It was just convenient. I mean, the toilet is going to be quite far away from where I would end up. So it started as just a practical decision. But very quickly it became something else. And I'm just feeling some internal bowel rumblings now. So it's probably talking about the subject is awakening those parts of myself. Anyway, so I waited, and I don't know, how much time passed before it started to get quite intense, but it did start to get quite intense. Now, whether I could describe this, like what was so intense about it, but there was a knowledge that there was shit inside me that needed and wanted to come out. And there was the decision I'd made not to use will, not to force it out. Then there was the clock ticking, was the time it was going to take. So basically I'd set up this situation of powerlessness where I needed something to happen, and I'd resolved not to use my will to make it happen, and therefore I was entirely dependent upon nature taking its course while the clock was ticking, and I felt as though I might be doing the wrong thing by hiding out in the toilet while things were happening on the retreat on Dave's Enlightenment Day. So there's these conflicting interests, and as a result of that, I ended up more determined. Like I evaluated the different variables, and I resolved that this is what I would do. That this was the choice I had made, and also the day before, Dave had been talking about how we were never ever going to get enlightened because we were efforting, and the only way for this to happen was through the complete cessation of all effort. So I started to think, okay, well, so maybe this is how I'm going to get enlightened, like Luther, who had his vision of God on the crapper and then created Lutheranism, Lutheran, whatever how it's called. Maybe this was the moment. And even if it wasn't, it was certainly symbolic and representational of that. So it was worth committing to. So I resolved, I'm going to just stay here. I'm not going to make an effort. I'm going to wait. But the more time passed, the more oppressive this decision became to me. The more powerless I felt, the more frustrated. And I ended up begging, pleading, praying to God to give me a bowel movement so that I could get free of my shit and leave this dark wooden box that I had confined myself to. And to make it worse, I even brought in the Buddhist element, which was Siddhartha sitting under the Bodhi tree, vowing not to get up until he attained enlightenment. I vowed I would not get up from that toilet until I'd had a bowel movement, as a way to nail myself down to that spot. And of course, the longer I remained there, the more frustrated, the more panicked, the more desperate, but also the more I saw all the symbolism of this. It was a beautiful sunny day, and I was confined to this small wooden cubicle with a little triangular window which I could glimpse nature outside of, kept there by my own personal shit, which I couldn't let go of. It was a perfect metaphor. And trying to apply the principle of the Tao, which is letting go of all efforting, letting go of the illusion of the doer, so that the thing that needed to happen could happen of its own accord. That was also part of the metaphor. And then, of course, all of that reinforced my conviction that I was where I needed to be, regardless of what was going on out there that I was missing in the group project, which was all about the group enlightenment and us working together to get enlightened. I had to end up saying to myself, well, this is how I participate in the group, is by isolating myself off and waiting to have a bowel movement. This is my contribution to the group effort. I'm going to practice the principle of no effort and surrender to the body and to the divine principle that brings all things into form, including a perfectly formed shit, which, to cut to the chase, and spoiler alert, didn't happen. I was there an hour and a half, and I didn't have a bowel movement. An hour and a half, can you imagine? And I don't know, what got processed via that hour and a half, but I know that I certainly had to have a more visceral experience of my powerlessness than I had had, in quite some time. I mean, one of the most visceral and difficult experiences of powerlessness I submitted myself to. Because imagine you're caught in this place where you feel that you can't get up, you can't have the shit isn't coming, and you can't use will. But the longer that I was there, the more desperate I become, the more desperate I was just to use that little bit of extra effort, just to squeeze the turd out and be done with it. But I absolutely knew that wasn't what I was going to do. I would break the vow and get up before that happened, which is what happened. I broke my vow because it's just a vow, that's all, whatever. And, things had happened in the interim. That's hilarious. Oswald Spengler said, is that Davy Bentley Hart's New Testament? And I thought that he was talking about my story of the shit that never happened. Because this could be the New Testament if we write it down. This was my conversation with God on the crapper. And, I did find out what I needed to know from God, even though he didn't give me a bowel movement. What God said to me was, trust the process and wait. Now, because I understood that as trust the process by which the body releases the shit and wait. Like, I know the body knows how to shit. If I can wait long enough, I'll be able to shit. But it was easy to extend that communication from the Most High God, if such it was. I'm not really claiming that it was. I didn't hear a voice echoing in my wooden chamber. But it was quite a clear thought that I had. That's all you have to do. Trust the process and wait. And it rippled out into my life as a whole, and specifically the quest for enlightenment, which my life has so much been about. Trust the process and wait. Everything happens in good time, starting with a bowel movement, which didn't happen in good time. I mean, good is a relative term. It happened in its own time. It wasn't good for me. I wasn't happy with it because I sat there for an hour and a half. I ended up having to tell people because they'd be wondering where I was and might start worrying I was missing in action or something. Tell people, when people came to the toilet, please tell others that I'm indisposed. I won't be able to make this particular meeting. And And then I ended up singing the song that I sang at the start of this YouTube event. It was before anyone arrived. I think first person arrived while I was singing it. Soy el vagabundo, vagando en el mundo, perdido en el sueño, buscando la verdad. I'm a stranger in a strange land, my fate is in God's hands. I'm fusing my heart with the heart of the sun. Never mind the answer, there is no question. We'll never know what we're doing here. From dust I was made, to dust I return. I leave no traces. And somebody, a close friend, was in the cubicle, came into the cubicle while I was singing, and they were banging along. So that was a moment. There were many, many moments in that hour and a half. You could say it was an intensified experience, and it went strangely fast. I couldn't believe that an hour and a half had passed. I'd actually been waiting on the toilet on the most important day of the most important retreat of my life, waiting to have a shit. And the time just flew away. And I was made aware of what a ridiculous figure man makes in the eyes of God. I'm making it very poetic, but I felt like a ridiculous man sitting there, having tied myself up in this knot, this Gordian knot of will and surrender, of will surrender, vowing never to leave the crapper until I had a bowel movement, and then realizing that I couldn't even keep to that vow, and so on. I mean, all my shenanigans and my shamantics and my will to cosmic power and galactic consciousness had led to that point where I was simply sitting, wrestling with my own incapacity to have a shit because of my choice not to use will to do it. Again, that's a microcosmic, metaphoric conundrum of existence, even right down to how all we need to do is get rid of our shit, and then we're free to enter life. But if we try to get rid of our shit because we're impatient and we want to get rid of it, we're just going to force it out, and there'll always be a bit left after. I mean, that's the thing about the perfect shit that requires no effort. It all just comes out in one movement. Well, it can actually, there can be stages and steps. It's so satisfying though, and it does. I can very easily see how if that experience of the perfect shit, which is simply the shit that requires no muscular effort, no contraction, no pushing, no recoil, and no of the other, is that word? Pushing. Anyway, it's easy to see how if that were magnified sufficiently, it could be the equivalent of total enlightenment. Because there's a feeling that there's something within me that is guiding the process, and that can do so in a way that is effortless ease and that provides infinite relief. It's over, it's done. Tetelasta, it is finished. I wonder if Jesus had a crap on the cross. They say that when people die, they do. It's a particularly hanged men, isn't it? And Buddha, what was he doing at the Bodhi tree? He swore not to get up. He must have been careful to take a good, final, full body crap before he sat down, otherwise he'd end up crapping his pants. can imagine that the devil's temptation, couldn't you? Turn a turd into a loaf of bread and you'll be free of this stench. Many a man has met God on the crapper. Oh, excuse me. For that bodily expression. Anyway, that's my story and I'm just going to stick to it. Hopefully it had some entertainment value. The way in which I imagine that it does relate to the recoil is that both relate to a muscular contraction, to the absence of letting go. The opportunity of the perfect shit, of experiencing the body doing its thing without the intervention and interference of our will, which might involve sitting and waiting for an hour and a half when we've got all this pressure, this mental pressure to be doing other things. Of course, we could take a book. That's a microcosmic surrender. And it's a way to experience the body in a state of relaxation that I think has its equivalent with, of course, what's called going with the flow. But I don't know if it's been described in a way that I've discovered in a way that meets with the experience that I'm seeking. Probably because the nature of it is indescribable. But there's something about being able to look at the world and engage in the world without any sense of it encroaching upon one that is like ultimate liberation. And I think this is what we seek, or I particularly seek in movies. When one watches a movie, one is engaged in a false world, but it's a simulation of the real world, hence it works, without any anxiety about being seen or encroached upon by that world. And I've had a number of experiences in my life, unfortunately many of them on drugs. They don't really count for much. But still, I've had enough of them without drugs to say, okay, so even the ones on drugs were probably representing something real and true of being somehow fused with existence for a moment or two at a time in such a way that I disappeared into the act of perception and I became one with existence. So it's like the world outside became the world inside, or vice versa. And with that came a feeling of immense joy, liberation, the joy of liberation. Yeah, so anyway, it's probably not helpful to try and describe it unless it's being expressed, and of course to express it wouldn't require describing it either. Have I had that experience in the last 54 minutes today? No, I wouldn't say I have, but I would say that I came closer to it at certain times, and perhaps closer than I would have come if I'd done something else. This is, I find the optimistic angle here. As I said earlier, if I've gone for a walk, might have enjoyed nature, but more like it was just been in my head. There's something about meeting the pressure It's not the recoil, but it's a willingness to, it's not compensated, but a willingness to leave our comfort zone and experience the discomfort consciously that neutralizes the recoil. Now, this can, of course, be a way to desensitize oneself. It can be neurotic and compulsive, like stimming or cutting, or any kind of extremist behaviors, and even the path of transgression. One can do all kinds of neurotic behaviors to neutralize one's fear in a way that desensitizes. But this isn't that. This is about becoming more sensitive while at the same time less reactive. And that's a very fine line to walk, because in order to neutralize our reactions, we have to willingly enter into areas that we're sensitive to without overdoing it so that we shut down, doing it just enough that we can observe our reactions, enough that we can start to inhibit our reactions. It's not exactly inhibit, because that's like from the outside in. It's more like preempt or hack into, because a reaction is an automatic thing. So it's a question of slipping in with awareness before the reaction has fully manifested. So then we can feel the reaction without actually it becoming a reaction. That's sensitization. And to do that, we have to put ourselves in situations, or we have to put ourselves, but we have to end up in situations where we are feeling reactive, we're being triggered. I think now Nevin has reached enlightenment. That's a joke in reference to previous comment. Jan found Jesus. Anyway, so here I'm back on YouTube, and of course I said I wasn't going to do YouTube anymore. Why did I do YouTube again? Because I wanted to experiment with the visual, because I wanted to be able to do this and not talk. I want to have more freedom not to talk. I'm doing it on Mixler. I'm also on Mixler. Makes it very hard to be silent. Not that it's easy on YouTube, but it's easier. I haven't been looking at myself, but I can if I'm going to be silent. And yes, that is David Bennett's New Testament. And yes, I did arrange it so it's visible. I don't know why I did that. I mean, I know logistically why I did it. It was on the table, so I just thought, oh, I'll stick it up because it'll make it more interesting in the background. I certainly didn't pick that book as the one to be visible. Had I done that, I probably would have picked something else. But as to, I don't know why I did it. I mean that I don't know why I did it because I'm not finding that the Christians who come to me very simpatico. There's been 2 in the last few months, and they've both been very annoying. And I thought I got over my hostility towards Christians, but I guess it depends what kind of Christian. Basically, there's an acid test. If you're a Christian and you believe in eternal damnation, then fuck off. I'm not interested in talking to you because you're not a good Christian. You haven't thought it through. Of course, that's a controversial statement, and I put it in a very contentious way because I felt like being that way. It's not so much that I'm offended by a belief in hell. What I was trying to get at there was, if you haven't thought through the profound contradictions in Christian dogma, which is merely interpretation of scripture, and wrong interpretation, at the very least premature, presumptive, assumptive, then I don't want to have a conversation with you, because you're one of those dogmatic Christians who, I mean, it's one thing to be dogmatic about Scripture, it's quite another thing to be dogmatic about the misinterpretations of Scripture. I do believe there's room for dogma about Scripture. Absolutely. There are things in the Bible I'm willing to allow are objectively true insofar as language can ever be that. But these aren't the things that Christians are saying, and there's definitely nothing about eternal damnation in there. So the inherent contradiction, I won't go into it again. You can check the comments of the blog. Well, I suppose I could read them. That would be an easy way in case people hadn't. And I'm sure people haven't seen. But I'll just do that as a way to sum up why I made that very strong statement, which is this one. A permanent separation from God would imply a permanent split within God, since all that is issues from God. If God creates angels that fell and were damned eternally, then God is divided within himself and suffers from a never-ending schizo delusion. This is not a happy prospect, though it is one that seems symptomatic of Christians bound up in the doublethink of a self-contradictory dogma. As I said earlier, the root of this error seems to relate to the misconception of eternity as a really long time, rather than as reality beyond time. If God exists beyond time, then there can be no damnation in eternity, only for those fallen into, trapped within time, prisoners of infinity. In other words, a timeless state, which is the only kind of eternal, is by definition a godly state, or one that pertains to heaven or union with God. Anything that pertains to hell is time bound and therefore cannot be eternal. Yes, it would seem that separation from God/eternity can continue for a very long time, but it cannot by definition continue forever, because only God is forever and God is all that is. Hell cannot exist within God, because if it did, it wouldn't be hell. And God wouldn't be God if there was a part of God that was separate from, it'd be like a traumatized God that had compartmentalized awareness in his body or his totality. Anyway, that's the gospel, the good news. It's rather sad, ironic, that so many Christians have missed this. And I think there was a slight footnote. Divine immanence is basic Christian doctrine. God's omnipresence means God is everywhere. That was because somebody was questioning the possibility that God would be in certain things. Now, I am aware that application of these principles or these interpretations can be a slippery slope. If all is God, what difference does it make what we do to one another, and so on and so forth. So there is a need for some sort of marcation between good and evil. I'm not denying that, but that's a human task that we have within each of our own individual lives, not to preach moral relativity. Most of it would extend to other humans, I'm sure, but not all of it. And the notion of being damned for all eternity is entirely arbitrary and counterproductive to that process of sorting the seeds in our own souls of good and evil. We do not need a switch as vicious and as cruel as eternal damnation to get right with God. And if you do, well, two things: you'll never get right with God, because you won't be able to reconcile that contradiction of how all-loving God could create beings given free will and then damn them to all eternity for making the wrong choices. And two, what was the other one? Well, anyway, one's good enough, isn't it? Don't have to finish every thought. And I don't know why I've ended up going into this spiel. It was because of David Bentley Hart, and the thought that that book on my YouTube video might encourage other Christians to think that I was simpatico with their beliefs. Well, maybe I am, maybe I'm not. It seems as though as a liminalist, or as a liminal being, I'm always going to offend somebody, and the Crowleyites and the occultists would see me as a Christian fuddy-duddy, and the Christians see me as I mean, this kind of Christian sees me as a irredeemably corrupted by Crowley ex-occultist. But I do not believe in the suspension of logic in order to maintain beliefs. Logic is logos, or at least is closely related to it. So doctrine, Christian doctrine, if it's going to be true dogma, as in useful as dogma, must adhere to logic, even if it's a higher logic, or a logic that's higher than most people can apply or practice, such as logic about hell and heaven and eternity and so on. That would seem to be beyond the parameters of logic. But it isn't, not really. Or at least one wouldn't want to prematurely abandon logic merely to stay true to some untested dogma. Well, I wouldn't anyway. Now, when I got baptized, was that a logical choice? I don't think that really applies. Anyway, nobody asked me that question. I asked it. Somebody mentioned Glastonbury. Okay, well, first of all, Damien asked, where was the retreat? The retreat was in Finland with David Shana. I've been to 11 or 12 now, so my reason for going. Funnily enough, that's the question that came up throughout the retreat. I came up with a pithy answer, which was to see and be seen. But of course, that won't reveal very much at all. That's why I'm doing this as well, as to see and be seen. That's why I try to do everything, perhaps. But I can't give a short answer to that, but you can read the long answers at the blog, my pieces about David Shana, including one about the last retreat, but one. Oswald said, I'd like to see David Bentley Hart take on the Mormon Transhumanist Association, which we recently discovered is a real thing. Wow, how far have they fallen? Hey, Glastonbury wouldn't have the Killers Anthem to swing flags to if it weren't for Joseph Smith. Well, interesting you mentioned Glastonbury, because David Shannon may be going there in July, if anyone is in Glastonbury. He's also going to London in July. He's going to be in London. So I encourage anyone who's curious to check him out. I don't know who the Killers are. I thought it meant the Kills at first. It's a band that I've enjoyed a lot, but I don't know the Killers. I don't know what that's a reference to. Anyway, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, so I won't linger on it. My left ear is starting to get a bit blocked, as in I can hear my breathing through it. Hey, hearing through your ears, that's not very radical. I mean, I can hear it from the inside. I can hear the inside of my head. And that might be a signal that it's time to wind up. Certainly, it's getting close to the hour 20 minute, which I used to keep these talks to. I'm going to do a meta commentary now. How did this event go? I would say I'd give it a B, possibly a B minus. I'd say that probably about 30% of it, maybe I was into the groove. About another 40% I was more or less, and then whatever's left I was kind of not really quite into it. One of the things I noticed is in my face throughout, consistently throughout, there's been moments in which I felt my face kind of sag. So as if something in me was experiencing a lack of vibrancy or joy at what was preceding. And so what I look for in an effective transmission is the opposite of that, which isn't necessarily my face lighting up, but it would be. Ideally, it would be my face lighting up with the light of my soul. And I don't think there were many moments today where that happened, so maybe I should give it a C+. But maybe there were, because I'm not always aware of it. And I'm definitely more inclined to judge myself harshly than to be over generous, which can be a problem in and of itself. I've kind of enjoyed this. I mean, I have enjoyed it in the context of a difficult experiment that isn't meant to be entirely fully enjoyable, I guess, or at least isn't expected to be or required to be. Damien says he enjoyed the talk, so that's something. I guess people who stayed must have enjoyed it enough to stay. That's 4 people, it was 5 a minute ago. I don't know if I should say anything else. Like, I used to do these for a kind of introducing people to what's going on or keeping people in touch with what I'm doing. I'm not really feeling that. I'm in a liminal space after this last retreat, so I haven't even done another podcast since I've been back, so I'm not sure if there will be one after today's. I haven't thought of anything to write for the blog. I'm trusting the process and waiting, and I'm sure that when there's time for something to come out, it will come out, and hopefully not be stinky when it does. It's the problem with coming up with metaphors that don't necessarily extend into every realm. I like that bees make honey. That seems to be the kind of shit that we want to be having, I suppose, if we're living in an organic farm in which our shit is being used as for methane gas for fuel or something along those lines. Everything is being put to use. And I do want the things I do to be useful, because if I'm just entertaining people, then I'm wasting both of our times, essentially. I mean, maybe not relative to other things we might be doing, but definitely relative to other things we could be doing. But that's the dilemma that we're faced with now, isn't it? How do you express who you are if you haven't found out who you are? How do you fulfill your mission if you don't know what your mission is? How do you live a full life if you don't have access to your life force? How do you know what to do with your time, or what to concentrate on, if you haven't really connected to that which is we haven't connected to that which wishes to live through us, that which gave us life, the divine oversoul, galactic high command, whatever it is that we so dimly intuit, experience through subtle sensations in the body. and yeah, thoughts and feelings as well, coming through every level and layer of our being. But it gets filtered, it gets weaker and weaker, the signal, the closer it gets to our mind and our constructed identity, until we end up just with a counterfeit of it, which doesn't lead us to the real thing. If we think it is the real thing, then we replace the genuine experience of the divine and of our souls with a mind-based construction of the same, which has no life in it. And that can keep us occupied our whole lives, paying lip service to it, feeding it, polishing it, oiling it, adding apps to it, just like our stupid smartphones become what live our lives for us. I don't have one, never will, don't suppose now at this point. Yes, I have read the Grabowski's review 14 times. I have that copy. Very short, perfunctory. And I think 14 times only do positive reviews, which I think is very, very lame. It's a trend of the times. It makes life so uninteresting when you can't badmouth anything. It makes it impossible as well, because there's so much to badmouth. I mean, almost everything out there is compromised. Except my books, of course, by Prisoner of Infinity, Seen and Not Seen, and The Vice of Kings. If you want to know where I was at and what got me to the point where I'm at now in terms of creative output and psychosocial explorations, I will be taking a new departure, I believe, and it will be oriented more towards the light and the transcendental, I believe. But I don't know what shape it's going to take. And certainly I won't be disowning or excluding any of those previous understandings, although they may get recalibrated. Ollie's reading Seen and Not Seen. Well, it's about time, Ollie, I have to say. I'm glad you are. Yeah, I've just written a couple of pieces, or adapted a couple of pieces from it for a site called Cinephilia and Beyond. So my attention has been going to movies a bit recently, but I think that's not central to what I was saying. That I'm waiting to have a more clear sense of what I'm given to communicate to the world, to other human beings, about the hidden nature of reality that is not sinister, dark, or destructive, that is the very opposite of those things. The hidden nature of reality that is benign, that is wholesome, that is good, that is transcendentally awesome and powerful. So also kind of frightening by its nature, but only because we don't fully understand it and have forgotten our connection to it, have lost our connection to it. Well, I don't know if I'll do another YouTube. I'll just think on it, sleep on it, etc., etc. Feel free to share your comments and so on if you haven't already, and because I'll put this up as a permanent thing, and I guess stay in touch. See you online. I don't know. I don't really have any words of advice. I guess turn off your computer and go and enjoy nature. Something like I'm going to do. I'm going to work in the thrift store, so I'm going to get to enjoy human nature. But that's nature too. So don't sell it short, because it's what you are. I suppose I put a song on on Mixler. See what it is. What is it?
The longer that you are removed from this world, the more I realize of you. Being that shines through in photographs. Not everyone really knows how to act. Lessons that pass themselves on down the line, quietly told me by you. I was younger then than I am now, and did not quite appreciate till quite long after you had passed through the gate. What was my life to be shown to your mind? Circle your truth and then break us. That last glance was a lighthouse, hinting from the shore. On the edge of the sea waves that crest where we are. There's more to the story than laughter and story.